In the summer of 1985, in the heart of Central Asia, a Soviet passenger plane rises into the night over the Kyzylkum desert. On board, nearly 200 people travel confidently toward their destination in Leningrad. The flight, carrying families, children, and adults returning from vacation or heading to work-related matters, faces a lethal combination of factors. Extreme heat, a high takeoff weight, and a miscommunication in the cockpit. Within minutes, what seemed like a routine climb will turn into an unexpected situation, marked by critical decisions and circumstances that will test the limits of the aircraft and its crew. July 10th, 1985. Karshi Airport, Uzbekistan. It's 7 p.m., and by this time Flight 5143 should be taking off, but its departure has been rescheduled for 11 p.m. Meanwhile, the crew prepares for takeoff from the cockpit. Aeroflot Flight 5143 was scheduled to depart from Karshi Airport, in what was then the Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republic. Its final destination was Pulkovo Airport in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, with an intermediate stop in Ufa, in the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. The route crossed vast desert and remote areas, with few ground reference points. On that July 10, 1985, takeoff was scheduled for 7 p.m., but due to various delays, departure was pushed back 4 hours, to approximately 11 p.m. This meant the flight would take place at night, over inhospitable terrain, and in persistently hot conditions even late in the day. The assigned aircraft was a Tupolev Tu-154B2, registration CCCP 85311, manufactured in November 1978 at the Aviacorps plant. The Tu-154 was Aeroflot's workhorse in the 1970s and 1980s. A medium-range trijet designed to operate in all types of climates, from the Arctic to the deserts of Central Asia. The aircraft was equipped with 3 Kuznetsov NK-8U engines and had logged over 12,400 flight hours and approximately 5,660 cycles at the time of the flight. In the USSR, this model was synonymous with modernity and ruggedness, but it also had a complex record of incidents due to operational demands and design factors. Aeroflot was, at that time, the largest airline in the world, managed directly by the USSR's Ministry of Civil Aviation. It was not only responsible for passenger transport, but also for cargo operations, mail, air ambulance services, and even government flights. Flight 5143 was operated by the Tashkent Division, which oversaw civil air traffic in Uzbekistan. Aeroflot had a reputation for being omnipresent, with thousands of domestic routes, but it also faced criticism for lax safety procedures, operational pressure, and a system where failures rarely reached the public. The cockpit crew came from the 219th Flight Squadron. At the controls was Captain O.P. Belasov, age 48. Beside him was First Officer A.T. Pozyomsky, also 48. Also in the cockpit, Flight Engineer A.S. Mansurov, age 32, and Navigator G.N. Argaev, age 41. 5 flight attendants completed the crew. All were seasoned professionals with years of experience. However, the accumulated delay and poor rest conditions in Karshi may have caused the crew to begin the flight with some level of fatigue. The flight was carrying 191 passengers, 139 adults, and 52 children. Many entire families were traveling on the route, which connected interior republics with the historic city of Leningrad. Including the crew, there were exactly 200 people on board, which was near the maximum load authorized by the manufacturer. At 11 p.m., the Tupolev began accelerating down the runway. It lifted off without issue and began the journey toward Ufa, estimated at 2.5 hours of flight time. Despite the night, the heat still lingered in the dense air of the Uzbek desert. Passengers settled into the cabin as the plane began a gentle climb northward. The Tupolev gained altitude until it reached 38,000 feet, or about 11,600 meters, its initial cruising level. However, the airspeed remained around 400 kilometers per hour, far too low for the aircraft's weight and altitude. Inside the cockpit, the crew switched the autopilot mode to increase speed, which caused a momentary nose-down attitude. The captain reacted by pulling back on the controls, raising the angle of attack again. As they climbed back toward cruising altitude, the speed dropped even further, below what it had been earlier. A warning chime should have alerted the crew that the aircraft was approaching stall speed, but the system's fuse had blown. Suddenly, heavy vibrations shook the aircraft. The flight engineer interpreted them as compressor stalls in the engines and recommended reducing speed, the exact opposite of what the situation required. The captain maintained altitude, fixated on holding the assigned level at all costs. But in doing so, the aircraft entered a critical angle of attack. The airflow to the engines was disrupted, and the 3 turbofans began to shut down one after the other. The speed dropped even further, down to just 160 knots, about 290 kilometers per hour. It was the swift and tragic end of the flight. Within seconds, the Tu-154 entered a flat spin. Passengers experienced a sense of weightlessness as the aircraft spiraled uncontrollably, descending into the darkness over the Kyzylkum. The crew managed to contact air traffic control, reporting that they were in a spin and had lost engine power. For 2 minutes and 33 seconds, the aircraft remained trapped in a vertical spin, rotating on its axis, with no chance of recovery. At 11:46 p.m., it slammed into the desert at high speed, completely disintegrating. There were no survivors. What had happened? Why did the aircraft suddenly stall? The investigation was conducted by the Ministry of Civil Aviation of the Soviet Union, but as was common at the time, much of the information remained classified and was not made public. As a result, decades later, we only have access to summaries and general conclusions, lacking the level of detail typically found in Western reports. The cockpit voice recorder, CVR, was destroyed in the crash, and no useful information could be recovered. This was a major loss, as it prevented investigators from accurately reconstructing the final exchanges between the pilots. The flight data recorder, FDR, did provide some information, and along with physical wreckage and technical analysis, investigators were able to establish the sequence of events. The investigation quickly focused on 3 major factors. 1. Extreme flight conditions. The aircraft was operating at a weight of 86.5 tons, within the approved limits for the Tu-154. However, the problem was that this limit had been raised by a decision from the Tupolev Design Bureau and the State Research Institute of Civil Aviation. Years earlier, the maximum cruising weight had been increased from 70 tons to over 86, without properly considering how abnormally high outside temperatures would affect performance. On that July 10th, the outside air temperature was 16.5 degrees Celsius, warmer than standard at that altitude. The aircraft's safety margin against stalling was minimal. Even a small deviation in speed or angle of attack could lead to an aerodynamic stall. 2. Technical and design factors. The critical angle of attack alarm, which should have warned the pilots, failed to work because of a blown fuse. No one had noticed it before the flight. This meant the crew received no audible warning at the critical moment when the aircraft entered a stall condition. In addition, all three Kuznetsov NK-8U engines began suffering airflow disruptions as the aircraft reached an excessive angle. This caused vibrations and abnormal noises that confused the flight engineer, who misinterpreted them as a compressor stall. That misjudgment led to a recommendation to reduce speed, when in fact the correct response would have been to increase power and initiate a descent. 3. Crew performance. The captain and first officer made serious errors. They maintained cruising altitude instead of initiating a descent when problems arose. They adjusted engine power erratically, throttling up and down, which contributed to the loss of control. They failed to recognize in time that they were entering a critical angle of attack. Investigators also noted that fatigue may have played a significant role. The crew had spent hours waiting in Karshi under inadequate rest conditions, and the flight eventually departed 4 hours late at night. While this was not officially confirmed, it is considered a likely factor in their poor decision-making. Final chain of the accident. With the high weight, excessive heat, the inoperative stall warning, and crew confusion, the aircraft entered a full stall at high altitude. All three engines shut down in sequence, and the Tu-154 entered a flat spin, a particularly dangerous type of stall that is nearly impossible to recover from in a large transport aircraft. The plane remained in this condition for more than 2.5 minutes before impacting the desert. The ministry concluded that the cause of the disaster was that the aircraft entered a flat spin at cruising altitude with a high weight and in high temperature conditions, which left almost no safety margin. Added to this were crew errors, who deviated from the flight manual and were unable to regain control. In the words of the report itself, it was a rapidly developing catastrophic situation that exceeded the capabilities of both the aircraft and the crew. The crash claimed 200 lives, making it the deadliest aviation accident in Uzbekistan and the worst involving a Tu-154 in Aeroflot's history. It was also one of the most severe air disasters of the 1980s in the Soviet Union. The tragedy had a national impact, although media coverage was limited due to Soviet censorship. For many, it was a stark reminder of the fragility of Eastern Bloc civil aviation during a time of political and economic pressure. The accident led to a revision of Tu-154 weight and performance limits, as well as tighter controls over the maintenance of critical alarms, such as the angle of attack warning system. It also became a case study in aerodynamics manuals, highlighting the dangers of flat spins in large aircraft. In later books by Soviet pilots, such as Reflections of a Sled Dog by Vasily Ershov, this accident was referenced as an example of human error amplified by technical factors. Aeroflot Flight 5143 reminds us how fragile aviation can be when multiple factors converge. A design pushed to its limits, adverse weather, and human decisions shaped by fatigue and pressure. In just a few minutes, an 80-ton aircraft went from cruising smoothly to spinning uncontrollably until it crashed into the desert. Today, this accident remains one of the most tragic in Soviet aviation history. The lack of cockpit recordings leaves us without a full understanding of what happened inside the flight deck. But what we do know is that 200 passengers and crew members lost their lives in a chain of preventable errors. As always, aviation learns from every tragedy. And while the Tu-154 continued flying for many years, this case became a turning point for rethinking safety margins and the importance of never operating an aircraft at the edge of its capabilities. I hope you found this story interesting. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the reconstruction and subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring the lessons aviation history has to offer.